Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 47th episode of Let's Talk Inclusion. My name is Manobina Chakraborty, the host of this talk show, and I have a very special guest with me today to discuss the need for training teachers to work with autistic students. She's Dr. Catriona Stewart, OBE FRSA, joining us from Scotland. Hi, Catriona. Good
Hello,
afternoon.
good
It's
afternoon to
evening
you.
in India, though. It's
What was
evening in
it?
India,
Okay, good evening.
7:30 p.m. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me.
So, before we formally begin our discussion, if you could tell our viewers about your life and work, Catriona, I mean, your journey with autism.
Okay, so I actually started researching into autism back in around 2000, 2000. And so I did a master's degree looking at controversies around diagnosis and theories of etiology of autism. And then a few years later, I started on my PhD. I was funded by a university it was Edinburgh Napier University,
Oh, yeah.
who funded my PhD. I was lecturing there at the time. And I focused on girls with what was called Asperger's syndrome at that point, because I could see there was a big gap in our knowledge that people were not thinking about girls and women at all, and I was really interested to find out more. And then at some point during that process, it dawned on me that autism was something that was personal to me. And I completed my PhD, and then I set up an organization to support autistic women and girls called SWAN, Scottish Women's Autism Network, SWAN. And I set that up, and it wasn't until about a year after that I went and got myself my own diagnosis of autism. So I'm a late diagnosed autistic person, as well as a doctoral researcher and a professional working in the field. So I was employed by Scottish Autism to build an online resource for women and girls and professionals for several years. And then for the last few years, I've been working full time for my own charity, for Swan, to get it up on a sustainable footing. So I have years now of building training materials, running workshops, delivering conference papers, engaging in partnership work with people like yourself, which is something I really, really love. And I've left Swan this year. I'm currently doing some work for Scottish Autism. During lockdown and the first year of COVID, I was asked to be a member of an independent advisory group to the Scottish Police Authority. And the reason for that was because the legislation, the law that was brought in at the beginning of COVID, actually took away everyone's citizens' rights. And the Chief Constable of Police Scotland thought it was really important to establish an advisory and scrutiny body to assure people, to inform the police, but also to assure people that the policing of the legislation was under a human rights watch, if you like.
Okay.
And so that was a huge privilege, actually, to be involved with that. And from my work on that body, I was invited to apply to be a member of the board of the Scottish Police Authority. So I'm now doing that. And finally, I will stop in a minute. The last thing I've started doing is that I've been training up and piloting, and basically I'm now working as an associate for an organisation called Axia, who are based in England. And I am running diagnostic assessments for individuals. So I'm also doing that. So
That's
that's it.
great. That's amazing. Thank you, Catriona. I would come to you for this diagnosis process. I would like to know something about it. But before that, let's just come to the topic of today's session, what we have announced. Uh, Catriona, most teachers across the globe do not have access to appropriate training and educational provision for autistic learners. Although there are pockets of good practice,
Yes.
on the whole, access is unequal and inequitable. Now, could you please tell our viewers why it is necessary for teachers to be trained to teach autistic learners in particular?
So, what I would say is that there are many aspects of mainstream education that create barriers to learning for neuro-minority individuals of all sorts, and that includes autistic children and older students too, going to college or university. There are many barriers, including the environment itself. So, school environments are often quite crowded, busy, can be quite chaotic and noisy. Lot of distractions, a lot of difficult sensations for autistic students to deal with. Executive functioning issues can mean that often students arrive in school already exhausted, just navigating things like the getting ready, getting the journey to school. A lot of the time they'll be very, very anxious about what the day is going to mean for them. So they're already quite stressed and tired by the time they get to school. During the school day, moving from location to location, for example, or dealing with different social demands from teachers and peers, planning their lessons, meeting the deadlines, all these things can actually be quite difficult and challenging for autistic learners. The demands of the social interaction of the day can cause huge amounts of stress and anxiety. There can be sadness and loneliness because they don't feel they fit in very well. And the autistic children are very often bullied really badly, and quite often people adults don't pick up on that. Older autistic children and older students too, they need different styles of communication to learn. And I can give you a few examples of that if you'd like. Shall I carry on?
Yeah, yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay, so communication, autism is, as much as anything else, is a communication difference. So trying to teach autistic students in the same way as you would others, often your communication will not be picked up on, in the same way, and vice versa. Teachers don't always understand autistic children's communication style. So autistic children actually often get into trouble for being cheeky or asking too many questions or being too blunt, or and in fact, that quite often it's really unfair, and the autistic child will perceive it as being unfair because in their heads they're doing their best to take part, to learn, to be a good student. Styles of communication from the teacher, for example, things like inference is often lost, for example. So autistic people require communication to be clear, explicit, concrete. So I'll give you an example from my PhD, actually. One of my participants told me a number of really interesting experience, hard for her, but interesting for me. She was told by the teacher told the classroom, you might like to read this book at home. And then, of course, the student didn't like to read the book at home, so she didn't read it. And then got into trouble for not being prepared sometime later when the teacher asked the class to start discussing the book. And it's not because the student was a difficult student. She was a very bright, very willing girl. But what she needed to hear from the teacher was, I want you to read this book at home, and I'd like you to have read it by such and such a date so that we can all discuss it in class. And then she would have done that because that was a very clear, explicit and concrete request.
Exactly. Yeah.
Another example would be writing a whole lot of questions up on the blackboard and saying to the class, today I'd like you to just spend the lesson writing answers to those questions. You can do them in any order you like. And the girls spent the entire class unable to make a decision about which question to start with. It's another trait of autistic people. We can be quite indecisive, and it's to do with anxiety about getting it right. And if you make a wrong choice, have you made a mistake, and have you, and so she sat and got very, very anxious and stressed and didn't answer the questions. What would have been helpful for the teacher to say would have been, you can answer the questions in any order you like, but if you can't decide, start at number 1 and just make your way through to the end. So it's quite simple things around communication, but it's a big thing. Communication is so crucial to learning, as well as to mental health and well-being. We all want to be included, but even more to feel appreciated and valued. And this is often missing in autistic people's lives, because their different communication needs and styles are often not understood, and they're not accommodated, and they do get into trouble a lot. Despite trying really, really hard to get things right, they very often find that they're being criticised, or people are irritated with them, or they just don't understand them. So Dr. Rebecca Wood, whose PhD focused on what inclusive education might be for autistic children, and she's published a book, which I'm very happy to give you details of. She found not only do autistic children face many kinds of exclusion from their education, with the impact that has on their learning, but her research also reflected my own PhD findings around aspects of their school experiences, the lack of understanding of validation, and the damage done to individuals' sense of worth and identity. So a lot of these children end up with poor mental health, not achieving their full potential. And that is going to have an impact on their entire life trajectory. So why is all this important? It's important because autistic children are often facing these insurmountable barriers to their learning. That often leads to different forms of school exclusion. They go into adulthood with very poor mental health. There is pressure on parents and families if their children are unable to stay in school, for example. And then ultimately there's a lack of achievement of their potential. A lot of the children are not achieving what they actually could do to the level of their abilities. So every aspect of their adult lives will be informed by that, and the choices they make, and the opportunities they're able to take or to have, the jobs they're able to apply for, the jobs they're able to keep, their healthcare needs. Autistic people often have a lower life expectancy than non-autistic people, and that's primarily it's thought due to lack of access to appropriate healthcare, but that's also partly to do with their own inability to value themselves enough to get those health checks. And I'm a wee trigger warning here, but a lot of autistic people do kill themselves. There's high levels of suicidality. So ultimately, the reason all this is so important is because not only are the individual autistic children's lives being put on this not very positive trajectory, and the impact that has on them as individuals, the impact it has on their families, but it's also a huge loss to society as a whole, because we lose their input and the contributions they could make to society, and we lose, and then there are the resources required with people who are in mental health crisis or who have poor health, or so it's a societal issue. It's not just an issue that impacts on the individuals, but it impacts on the whole community and society as a whole. So I've come to the end of.
Very...
I think you're right to say that there is good practice, and I absolutely wouldn't like to to think, you know, I wouldn't like to suggest that there aren't really good teachers out there, and really committed teachers like yourself, actually, Manobina. But there is a lack of good quality training, as you said. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a glass of water. So I think one of the questions would be, you know, is the available special educational needs training not sufficient? Is that right?
Yeah, actually, this one training program, special education needs training program, is more or less available in most of the countries. But is this sufficient to teach autistic learners as well? That is my question. We have all of us have undergone this training program called ACND. But do you think this is only this program is sufficient to cater to the needs of autistic learners as well? That is my question.
Okay. Yes, and it's a very good question, because I think it raises a lot of issues around, I suppose, historical understanding of what autism is, and because autism originally was believed to be, so the original. Sorry, start again. The original picture of autism was very much tied up with a picture of autism combined with learning disability. So
Yeah.
people's understanding of autism was really evolved through that idea that autistic people are also learning disabled. And it used to be thought that autism was fundamentally an issue of lack of input of information. You know, the autistic person had big walls up against taking in information. In fact, we realise now it's the opposite. That actually a lot of the time autistic individuals are being overwhelmed with information that they can't always prioritise and filter out, and that includes sensory information. So part of the issue around training for autism is that old idea is still underpins a lot of training around autism, that actually autistic learners are somehow not necessarily able to learn, when in fact what they need is different styles of learning and different styles of communication. So a lot of autistic people are actually, they may have all sorts of issues around sensory, you know, processing, sensitivities to noises, light, smells, colors, whatever, all these things that may inhibit them from learning in the same way as others, or at the same pace as others. They may have, as I said earlier, executive functioning issues. So that's to do with how you take in information, process it, organize it, and act on it. So it's planning and navigating journeys and meeting deadlines and all that kind of thing. But a lot of them are very, very able. A lot of autistic people are extremely able if they are accommodated, then those needs are accommodated. So I think a lot of traditional special educational needs training doesn't really necessarily address those individuals who are actually very capable. In Scotland, under our education law, exceptionally able students is actually defined in law as a special educational need category. But I have yet to find a school or to hear of a story where very highly able students are accommodated in the same way as, say, learning disabled students, because people don't understand that in itself can bring some issues, and that the overlap between exceptional ability in some areas and autism is actually quite a big one, I would say. So I think there's never going to be a one size fits all. I think that's the thing. You can't really necessarily, I think the training for teachers in terms of autism has to be an understanding that there has to be almost a co-production between the teacher and the student, in order to accommodate that individual's specific needs. The problem is, of course, one issue is often that teachers are under a great deal of pressure. They might have a large class of children, a curriculum to deliver, and lack of the range of resources and time that might support their teaching for different kinds of students.
Exactly. Yeah. So, is there any standardized teacher training course for autism available in Scotland or in the UK?
Well, there is training. Because I haven't come through the primary or secondary education system, so my experience is in tertiary education. I'm sort of trained to do further and higher education, and that's my area of experience really. But my understanding is that, yeah, there is training, but a lot of it is actually outdated, really. As I was saying earlier, it's based on a kind of different model of autism, and our understanding of autism is evolving all the time. So, at the moment, autism and other neuro minorities, it's categorized within a medical model as a mental health disorder. And that in itself leads to a lot of the stigma, the misinformation, and the misunderstanding of what autism is and what it means to the individual. So, unfortunately, a lot of the training that's available is not really appropriate, and actually is more than unhelpful, can be actually quite toxic, and it's often a bit inconsistent in terms of standard or the amount of training that teachers get or any other professional gets. So, there are certainly, in the UK, we do have some quite good, I would say, training and resources available.
This, yeah.
But they're not necessarily going to be accessed consistently, and they're not designed or created in cooperation or co-production with autistic people. So there's still a lack of understanding of the lived experience of the autistic individuals and the benefits that understanding would bring to everyone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so, yeah. And as you know, that India is a huge country and the second most populated in the world with 1.38 billion population as per the official estimate in 2021. Yet we have just a couple of courses available into different parts of the country. So you can understand the scenario here. That's why I was asking about a standardized test for the whole of the UK. And yeah, and you have a very strong network, right, Catriona? You have contacts all over the world. So do you think it is possible to collaborate internationally to create a standardized teacher training course structure for autism?
Well, I would think that's just fabulous. I would love to see that happen.
I think we already discussed about it a couple of months ago. We had a
Yes.
meeting regarding this, right?
Yes.
Some collaboration between India and Scotland, maybe. So, if it is possible, we at I for Inclusion are very hopeful, very optimistic, and open to work.
Well, as you know, I feel really passionately about this area, about education. I'm a huge fan of partnership work and sharing knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
We do genuinely. Partnership work can be so much greater than the sum of its parts, because we all bring our own perspectives and our own experience and our own skills and our ideas to things. So, no, I would love this to happen. And globally speaking, yes, we're all working in very different contexts. I would say, it sounds, despite having been quite negative, I would say, we are quite well equipped in Scotland, and I am actually quite proud of some of the work we're doing. And there's a lot of genuine intent, and because we're a small country, I actually think that makes it easier. It makes it easier to access each other And even in the UK, again, it's much smaller, even though there are different contexts between England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland, for example, but we're still geographically and culturally so quite close and small compared to
I
India.
completely agree. Completely. I worked in Scotland, as you know. I worked there for 3 years, and that too with autistic children and young people. So Scotland is very well equipped. I completely agree with you.
And there's a lot of and there's a lot of good intention and a lot of talking going on at the moment. Particularly, Scottish government is putting a lot of effort into engaging with the autistic community and really building up our understanding of what is needed and how we can progress things. And we're having some very good conversations, and we also have several what we call autistic people's organisations now established in the country. So Swan is one of them.
Yeah.
It's established and run by autistic people. But there are several others and more emerging, and I think that's kind of changing the conversation quite a lot as well. And certainly we've had a lot of support from Scottish government, so Swan and other organisations. And I think there's no reason why we shouldn't share that, and work cooperatively across the globe. What I find interesting as well is I have had more people get in touch from around the world. I've had, contact with I've done some training online. Unfortunately, I'd quite like to do it in person, but online for Singapore, I've had two different kind of groups there, and I was approached by people from Uzbekistan a while ago, and got contacts in Canada. Yes, I mean, it feels so much more possible to make those links around the world and to share our experiences and what we're learning. And yeah, definitely.
So let's do something, Catriona. Let's think about it seriously, and let's try to do something about it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, Manobina, I am a passionate educator. I love teaching. I love sharing knowledge. I love watching people. I love being a witness to people growing in wisdom and self-confidence and, building skills and assertiveness. It's just one of the things I love doing. So, absolutely.
So let's take some quick questions from our viewers. There are a lot of questions I can see in the comment section. Number one, what is your idea of true inclusion? Catriona, this is for you.
My idea of true inclusion is a society that absolutely does accommodate and value difference. So rather than, a lot of the current training, I would say, and a lot of it's about interventions and strategies for interventions and strategies for making autistic people less autistic, actually, remedial rather than actually accepting of the individual's own needs and assets. So my idea of true inclusion is that it's just a society that goes, it's okay to be different because we all bring something with us. And in any case, even if we don't, we are human and have value, and therefore we should be, included and accommodated. And I think it's also about creating an environment where it's not about equality, it's about equity of opportunity. So for a lot of people who are different, for example, autistic people, there are so many bumps and holes in the road that stop them achieving or getting access to their human rights, actually. So it's about smoothing off that terrain. It's about filling in the holes, smoothing out the bumps so that actually everyone has equity of opportunity.
Very, very, very true. What challenges did you face in school as a student? Were your teachers able to do justice to you at all times?
Oh, I was very, very talkative as a child, so you wouldn't be surprised to know that. So I got into trouble a lot for talking, but mostly I was talking about things that I was really excited and interested in. And sometimes my real joy in learning was actually almost not exactly punished, but it wasn't acknowledged for what it was. And by the time I reached secondary school, I'd really lost interest. So I performed quite badly in my exams, and it's taken me a lot of years to catch up. I finally got my PhD in my 50s. I've had a very interesting and varied life, but it would have been nice to have grown into adulthood without a sense of failure and of being less than, which is what I did. So I had one or two really lovely teachers who kind of got me and were really kind to me, but a lot of the time I felt I was just being criticized and getting into trouble just for being me, and I didn't understand it. That's the thing. I was a bright, enthusiastic, energetic child, and I couldn't understand why I seemed to get it wrong all the time. So I hope that answers your question.
One more. Do the autistic students of this generation face equal challenges, or do you think they are less now?
I think that's a
The
really
challenges,
interesting.
yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question. I think the challenges are different. I think in many ways I wouldn't have wanted to get an early diagnosis because I'm not sure in my era I would have gained from having a diagnosis. And not having a diagnosis meant that I did all sorts of things with my life that if I had been told I was autistic and the people around me reacted the way often people do now, I might not have done those things in my life because I would have been being told you can't do that, you're autistic. So, for example, I've had some really interesting career, jobs and experiences. I've got married, I've raised a family, I've had a very rich and interesting life. I do wish that I'd known I was autistic in a positive context, because then I would have spent less time anxious, overwhelmed, bewildered, bored, doing things that didn't play to my strengths, all sorts of things. So I think today's autistic students sometimes have, what they have is they have greater insight right in the adults around about them. So if their families are understanding and supportive, that's a huge bonus for them. I think I have met some young autistic people that absolutely blow me away with their self-knowledge and their insight and their talents and their clarity of thinking. Brilliant. And that's partly, I think, down to them as individuals, obviously. But also maybe the fact that they've known they were autistic for some time has actually been really supportive. But autistic students are still facing a lot of challenges because those barriers at school are still there, and lots of them end up, and I think in some ways maybe it's worse because school wasn't brilliant for me, but I did do okay. I did get some higher examinations. I did go to college. And I think if I had to survive in a modern secondary school, I wouldn't survive, because I was at an old-fashioned school where you sat in rows of desks, and your long rows of desks, and you all sat facing the front. You had your own desk. There wasn't a lot of group work or teamwork. It was very disciplined. It was very quiet. You paid attention. Well, apart from me, he chatted a lot and got moved down to the front of the class all the time. But I mean, in general, so as an environment, that old-fashioned style of teaching probably worked much better for me than the current style of teaching in secondary school would. I don't know how some of these young autistic people cope in school at all. And of course, lots of them don't.
One more question. I think a mother can understand her child the best. So, what do you think? Is it necessary to be trained for a mother too? Interesting question.
Well, it's a great question, because I think it depends on what that training involves. I was at Autism Europe Congress in Nice in 2019, where I heard a terrifying presentation about training mothers to deliver intensive social training to their new babies to stop them becoming autistic. And I was just going, that's just no. So, but I think, so the only evidence that's available in terms of what is effective in terms of interventions with autistic children has been the story, the narrative around that has been for some time that early diagnosis is a positive thing. But there's very little evidence, it's flimsy at best, and there are huge ethical issues around the application of intensive communication therapy or applied behavioral analysis, any of that kind of thing. Those things are, and lots of autistic adults talk about being traumatized because actually it was intensive training to not to be autistic, which, which isn't helpful to the individual. So what I suspect, and a lot of us would, is that where early identification comes in useful is if the adults around that child begins to understand that this child has specific needs and puts things in place to support those needs. And if you talk to experienced clinical psychologists, for example, they might say that some of the best outcomes are where a child's been diagnosed early and the family has normalized it and just become part of the family story, and they have put the things in place that they need to support their children, and if maybe the child's managed to get into a good school that has supported their educational needs. I have no doubts at all there are lots of autistic people out in the community that have never been identified or diagnosed, and actually maybe don't need to be because they've had a good background that supported their individual characteristics, and they've gone on to find their niche in life. So what I'm saying to you is yes and no. Yes. I don't even know if it's training that's required for the mother or the parents. I think it's that insight and that knowledge. And I've certainly had wonderful feedback from some people who said that the work that I've done with Swan and all that information that we've shared and all the learning we've gained over the last 10 years of Swan and that we've shared has helped them to be better mothers to their
knowledge always helps. Knowledge.
Absolutely. And do remember as well, of course, that some of those mothers will be autistic themselves.
And maybe they are undiagnosed. That can also be a possibility.
Very often, a lot of autistic women actually do come to realize about their own autism because of their child. And sometimes that's helpful. So quite often, autistic adults, they will relate to their children if they're autistic, even if they don't know that they're autistic, because they relate and they can, and that in itself can cause some problems in terms of, I actually it was heartbreaking case of a woman who had her son taken away from her because she couldn't bear to send him to an environment she could see was damaging him. And she was almost certainly autistic, and the boy was autistic, but the authorities just would not really listen to her or take her seriously, and so they took this boy off her because she wasn't sending him to school. It was heartbreaking.
Very much so. Yeah.
So no, that was a really good question. Really, these are great questions. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. What are the expectations from the peers in understanding of inclusive behavior or culture? Maybe in a classroom situation she's talking about?
Well, it's a funny one, because children in some ways can be very accepting, but they can also be really unaccepting. And some differences really, a lot of autistic children are very badly bullied, like seriously bullied, assaulted.
Don't you think, Catriona, sensitization is the key here? Don't you think the school authority, the teachers, must sensitize other children about autism?
Well, absolutely. And if you build an inclusion, that's a culture of inclusion in the school. I was running a workshop for some families a while ago, and one of the families said about how their child was taken out of class every week, once a week. They were taken out of class to go to a special remedial session on social communication or social behaviors or whatever. And I actually thought, but that's doing is drawing attention to her difference. It's excluding her from the classroom for that hour a week. so she's missing that lesson. And it's marking her out even more. So, it's kind of emphasizing what she's not good at rather than focusing on what she is good at. And my response is, why is that teacher or why is the school not running a weekly class for the whole class to talk to them about inclusion and tolerance and accepting of difference? So instead of trying to train her to be something she's not, why not teach the whole class about acceptance? So I think that would be my answer to your question. I think a lot of the time that understanding and that philosophical outlook perhaps isn't there. I'm not saying it's never there. Of course it is. There are lots of cases where children and teachers are very supportive and very inclusive. I was talking to a young man yesterday who was saying that he had been bullied at school, but his commentary was around, he felt in general that his peers had actually probably tried to be inclusive and had tried to include him in things and had been accepting, but it didn't stop the bullies from targeting him. And I was trying to say to him, but it was nothing about you. It's nothing about you. People do not cause bullies to bully them. Bullies are bullies, but you're absolutely right. It's really important for the whole school culture to actually step in and go, that's not okay.
Very much so. How inclusive is the job market in Scotland? I know they're an equal opportunity employer, but I think there may be something more to it. Are autistic persons truly understood at the workplace? Are they bullied? Do they have to give up at some point?
Well, that's a big question, and it's a very interesting one as well. I love these questions. Brilliant. So my organisation, Swan Charity, Swan, was funded. I gained funding in 2019 from Scottish Government to run an employment project, initially for a year, but we ran it, in fact, for 18 months. And that was absolutely brilliant, fascinating, and we learned a great deal, and we worked with a lot of people. The project was that we invited autistic workers, autistic women, adult women who were in employment, to contact us if they felt they were struggling. And what we offered them was individual support and coaching and peer support for them, but we also offered to contact their employers and to deliver training to colleagues, to managers, to HR. And we worked with around 40 women over that 18-month period. And we delivered training to organizations and companies across all the sectors. So you can imagine, so from retail to cinema to ferry organization, we're an island and we have all the ferries, to education, primary education, secondary education, tertiary education, the police, the prison services, local authorities. I can't remember if I said shops, retail, but that, so right across the sectors, and it was really, really interesting. Sometimes it was also very frustrating because what we were offering for employers was really, support to help them create a more inclusive working environment. We weren't going in there telling them how terribly they were doing it. We were going in there to try and say, look, we can help you create a more inclusive environment. Sometimes we met what I called employer fatigue, which was where employers who actually really have tried to do their best, but because they don't understand what they're doing, have kind of made things almost worse. And then they kind of go, well, I've tried everything I can think of. What else can I do? So there's, we did find that there were people already, quite a few of the women that contacted us were already in a kind of employment tribunal or complaints process. Sometimes, certainly, you're right. Sometimes a positive outcome was actually to support that individual autistic woman to leave that job and get something else that suited her better, because you can't always make the square peg fit in the round hole. And if they were in a job that actually there was just no way it was ever going to be comfortable for them for whatever reason, then maybe, you know, some of that coaching and support was about saying, well, maybe you should think about doing something else. So it was really interesting. Like I say, we learned a lot. We built our own best practice in terms of recruitment, you know, so that we actually have developed as an organisation, Swan, well, it's not we anymore because I've left Swan, but Swan, you know, developed a recruitment process that was as inclusive as we could make it. So, for example, when we were interviewing, we offered all the interviewees an opportunity to attend a coaching session with an HR expert that worked with us to understand how to get the best out of their interview process, what we would be looking for. We gave them the questions beforehand to say, you know, this is what we're going to be asking you. There's going to be no trick questions. This is what we're looking for. We just want to know about your experiences in these areas. So yeah, so I'm not directly answering your question in that you're right. We are in equal opportunities, and we are a country, and we are also, you know, we do have the Equalities Act 2010, which is UK wide, which does it demands reasonable adjustments and accommodations for people with protected characteristics. But yeah, how that is actually interpreted and how that's acted out in real life does vary. I'm sorry, I'm giving you a very long answer to all your questions, but yeah, it's not always brilliant.
Thank you very much, Catriona, for answering all the questions. And thanks a lot to all our viewers for your enthusiastic participation. As Catriona also mentioned, I like the questions very much. Very interesting questions you have posted. And before we sign off, Catriona, would you like to give some concluding comments, suggestions for our viewers, please? Or maybe if you'd like to take up some more points regarding our topic of discussion today.
I think one of the things I would like to emphasize is that creating an inclusive environment in education, in schools, and universities, in employment, I sometimes think that there's an anxiety that if people do, I think there's an anxiety that those accommodations and creating that equity is going to be very, very demanding. It's going to be resource heavy. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. My experience is that that's actually not necessarily the case at all. That what you're doing is, it's a human rights issue to me, first and foremost, because a lot of autistic people are being denied their human rights in terms of access to education, in terms of access to appropriate healthcare, in terms of access to employment, in terms of mental health and well-being, freedom from being bullied and targeted, all these things. But it's also looking at it pragmatically, is trying to explain to people, but you will gain from this. Making space for people doesn't lose you anything. You will gain from it. Society will gain from it. The individuals will gain from it, but so will everyone else in terms of, well, the research in the corporate world shows that, you know, diverse organizations are productive organizations. They're happy and they're more productive. So you know, everyone gains. Well, that's going to be true across the board. You know, that an inclusive society is a much healthier, much happier, and much more positive one. And it doesn't mean it's going to cost a lot. It just means people raising their levels of understanding, knowledge, as Manobina says, you know, the knowledge base, taking in that information and applying it. And that requires goodwill more than it actually requires anything else. There was another question there. Did someone want to ask another question?
Yes, someone has, yeah, there's one more question, Suzanne. Now, how do you prepare learners under the autism spectrum for life after schooling? What are some of the vocational and life skills that are key at this stage?
Okay, so we talk a lot about transitions, don't we? We talk a lot about transitions for autistic people. And what that usually means is young people transitioning from school to post-school, whether it means further education or employment. And I actually think, no, you're absolutely right. It's a quick spot-on question, because I think that transition into adulthood has to start much earlier, because for autistic children, reaching the ages of 13, 14, being asked to make choices, all those kind of things is hugely anxiety provoking for them. I actually feel very strongly about equipping young people, generally, certainly autistic people, with those tools for self-care and understanding. And I would have all girls, certainly, and certainly all autistic girls, and possibly autistic boys too, because quite a lot of autistic boys present a bit like autistic girls in terms of some of their characteristics. I would teach them assertiveness. I wouldn't send them off for social skills training. I'd send them off for assertiveness training, because that's not about being aggressive or pushy. It's actually just about knowing who you are, understanding your needs, and being able to assert those needs. And I actually think that's probably absolutely key. In answer to your question, is support the young people being themselves, enable them reaching the best of their potential, and give them those tools for self-understanding and self-care. And that will set them on a positive life trajectory, I would say. I hope that answers your question.
Very much so, yeah.
Thanks for the question.
So nice of them. Thank you very much, Catriona, for your time and support.
My
And I would
pleasure.
like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of all of us at I for Inclusion. Yeah, there are a few more thank yous. Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank
So
you
nice.
all.
So nice of you all. Thank you very much. So thanks a lot, Catriona, and we would love to collaborate in near future. Again, we would love to have you in this program. Let's talk inclusion.
Well, delighted, Manobina. It's a real pleasure, and we'll speak again. And thank you for all the work you do. It's brilliant.
Thanks a
Honestly.
lot. Thank you. And my dear viewers, this episode will be available on Facebook for our followers to watch later as well. You may please share this video with your network. In case you have any queries, kindly write that in the comment section. We will get back to you as soon as possible. And I will come back on the 9th of September with the 48th episode of Let's Talk Inclusion. Please keep an eye on our Facebook page for the announcement. Till then, take care and goodbye. Bye, Catriona. Thank you once again. Thanks a lot. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye.